Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm celebrating the 1-year anniversary of Storytelling Saga, and I can't believe it's been an entire year already. I mean, my goodness, time really does fly. And I figured to celebrate this milestone, I would take you behind the scenes of the podcast. Since I personally love behind the scenes, especially for TV shows, I find it so fascinating. So I figured that would be fun. And when coming up with the idea for this podcast, I knew I wanted to focus on storytelling since that is my passion. But the initial idea actually was that I was going to share a new short story each and every week. But then I quickly dismissed that idea, not because I don't love sharing my own short stories. It's just that I have such a love for shows, books, movies, etc., that I figured to broaden the topic of storytelling in general and discuss my favorites each week and also the art and craft of storytelling. So that's how that came about. And also, I knew going into it that I wanted to do this on my own without a co-host. And there are other podcasts that do just have one host. It's just they are not as common. In general, podcasts have at least 2 co-hosts, sometimes more. But I knew I wanted to just do this on my own and really share my love of storytelling. And so one of the first things I did when setting up this podcast was set up the social media. So all the accounts, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And then I created a logo for the show. And I used a website called Canva, which I highly recommend. It's great not just for designing logos, but it has all these great templates for infographics, business cards, invitations, so many different things. So it's a great tool to use. And the logo, though, I'll admit, it's very simple. I just designed it on my own. And that's something down the line that I'm considering, of having an artist actually just a commission to have them redesign the logo, make it stand out more. But for now, it's just the nice simple logo, Storytelling Saga, with a little notepad, and then the podcast that shares stories, the tag for this podcast. And then really with this podcast, it's a lot of learning as I go, because I didn't know much about podcasting, let alone how to set it up. So that was really the biggest challenge, was how to get this off the ground. So what I did was just go on YouTube, how to start a podcast, and I learned all these things about creating an RSS feed. So the site that I use to host the podcast is Libsyn. Once you set it up, you can link it out using the RSS feed to other platforms. Also, another thing that I have to mention is the actual title, Storytelling Saga. I considered Storytelling Series, but that didn't seem as interesting to me. And then I settled on the word saga, since it's just a grand, epic tale, and that's what this podcast is. It's an ongoing journey, just talking about storytelling in all its forms, fiction, screenwriting, etc. And my first time recording, I admit I was nervous, and oh my gosh, listening to those earlier episodes of my podcast, just my intro, like, hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga. It's like, wow, I'm speaking so quickly. It's like, girl, take a breath. My goodness. Thank goodness as I said, I'm learning as I go. So really just slowing it down and not speaking so fast, because that's just crazy. It sounds like my voice is sped up, but it's not. That's just me speaking quickly, getting through the intro. It's crazy. So when recording, I actually don't use any fancy recording equipment. I don't have a microphone. That is something I'm considering down the line, to purchasing a microphone. But for now, what I do is I actually just record on my phone using the Voice Memos app, since I have an iPhone. And then what I do is I upload it to my computer. And the audio editing tool I use is Audacity, which is a free audio editing tool, and I highly recommend it. It's great. It's easy to use once you get the hang of it. I will say the first time I used it, it took me a while to get used to it, and recording and editing that first episode, even though it's a short episode, it took me, I kid you not, 3 days. 3 days to edit it. So it took quite a while. getting the hang of that. And then to prepare for this podcast, so when it's just a short story, for instance, I focus on just writing and editing. But when it's something like a TV show, those are obviously much longer and more extensive, especially when it's a long-running show. So that's why those episodes tend to run longer, because that was another thing I was worried about when I first started this podcast was, how am I going to sustain talking about a book or a movie, for instance, for at least, I wanted to do at least 20 minutes or so, since I'm just doing it by myself. And so my first 2 episodes are short, since I was just sharing a short story, but then when I got to episode 3, it was over 20 minutes, so I was satisfied with that. And then I got to episode 4 when I discussed BoJack Horseman, and that was well over an hour long, and I realized, okay, so I can really dive deep into certain topics. I don't need to worry about the episodes being too short, clearly. In fact, sometimes they run so long, mostly just with the shows, since there's just so many episodes to cover, and I would try to cover as many as I love that I can. So when I prepare for a show, discussing a show that week, I'll watch episodes, I'll take notes. What I used to do that wasn't as fun, frankly, was I would take notes as I was watching the episode, wanting to jot down quotes, things like that. But now what I do is I just watch the episodes and just kind of jot down key moments or things I love here and there. Sometimes I don't even do that. I just have the episode title, and I've seen it so many times that I can just say some of my favorite moments. So this podcast has actually really tested my memory, because I can take notes, obviously, but sometimes I just go off of memory with things. So when discussing books, again, what I used to do was as I was reading, I would just pause whenever I saw a great quote that I wanted to share on the podcast, and I would just jot down the page number. And I did away with that now too, because it's just every few pages or so stopping to jot down a page. It was just disrupting me reading the book. But now I'm getting more, obviously having done this for a year now, I've fine-tuned my preparation process each week. So with movies too, for instance, I would do the same thing. I would take notes as I was watching the movie, but I don't do that anymore. I just watch the film, enjoy it, and then jot down notes afterward. Because also what I'm trying to do away with still is when I over-recap the plots for things. I've done that with some books too. So really what I try to do is I want to focus more on the storytelling, of course, but also the characters, since those are the things that resonate with me, and just the themes, those kinds of things. And what's great, actually, is my most downloaded episode to date is, believe it or not, episode 22, when I discussed Pixar's 22 Rules of Storytelling, which is a list compiled by former Pixar storyboard artist Emma Coates. And what I did was, if you didn't listen to that episode, was that I went through each of the tips she gave, screenwriting tips, based on her time at Pixar, and then I drew examples from my favorite Pixar movies. So I'm really proud of that. And I'm also really proud of, obviously, the interviews and the guests I've had on the podcast thus far. I'm proud of my very first interview, when I interviewed Jerry Persigian, my TV writing instructor, and he has 30 years of experience, over 30 years of experience working in television. I'm proud of that. So heading into the second year of the podcast now, I'm looking forward to having more guests on, maybe even some returning guests, and more interviews. Of course, also sharing more original works, and also more episodes about not just my favorite shows, books, movies, etc., but also the art and craft of storytelling. I'd like to explore more of that as well. I have a few topics that I need to kind of flesh out more, so that should be coming up soon enough. But definitely just looking forward to more, and of course expanding my reach and my audience for this podcast. So I will say, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, I do encourage you to do so. Just come up with a topic that you're passionate about, whether you want to do it with a friend or just host the podcast on your own. Just make sure you know that you have to invest time into it, something that you're truly going to want to talk about each and every week. And again, it's a learning process, learning as you go. So I'm just excited to continue on this podcasting journey, and whether you've been listening since the beginning or whether you just started listening recently, I truly thank you so much. I really do appreciate your support, and the fact that you listen each and every week. It means a lot to me. So with all that being said, got to go back to basics and share a short story this week. And this is actually a short story I wrote a few years ago. It's a quick one. It's a fun one. It's a short one. And it's actually in first-person point of view. First time doing a first-person story on this podcast. It's called Rules of Rejection. And here we go. Without further ado, it's story time. No guy likes to be rejected, but what can I say? As a young, beautiful woman, I get asked out a lot. And sometimes when the guy just doesn't fit the bill, there comes the much-practiced art of rejection. I don't mean to brag, but after years of experience, filled with lots of date requests, I'd have to say that I've definitely mastered the art of rejection. What does it take, you ask? Well, allow me to impart my wisdom. First and foremost, you need to know right off the bat that guys hate rejection. Oh, sure, they'll act tough on the outside, brush it off like it's no big deal, but on the inside, trust me, they're a little boy crying like a bitch. Guys are way more sensitive than girls. I firmly believe that. It's just that girls wear their hearts on their sleeves and aren't afraid to express their wide range of emotions. Guys put their ego over their emotions. Hence why guys ripping on one another is actually an expression of friendship and love. Anyway, so on to the different types of rejection. The easy way is to let him down easy. Be gentle, be polite. Say thanks, but no thanks. The guy will still suffer a blow to that precious ego of his, but at least you were able to take his fragile little feelings into account. Then there are some more creative ways. The good old-fashioned go-to lies that work every time. I've got a boyfriend. I'm seeing someone. I'm too busy. Usually the old boyfriend line is the best trick. Sorry, I'm taken. It's like your territory or something, and some other guy has already claimed you. Sexist? You bet. But it works. And if it's not a lie, then that's all the better. There are also the craftier, not to mention crueler ways to reject a guy. You can go on the attack. You're not my type. You're sweet, but I'm not interested. Depending on how well you know the guy, you can get more specific. Didn't you just ask out that girl from the nail salon last week? You just broke up with your girlfriend. Let that wound heal. I'm not your rebound girl. As you can see, there are all different methods. We've only just scratched the surface. Feel free to come up with your own variations based on how you see fit. I'd tell you more, but I've got a date. Alright, so that was Rules of Rejection. Take from that what you will. Oh, and by the way, another little behind-the-scenes tidbit for you. When I share a short story, I actually typically, not in this case ironically, but I typically record that first. So I record the short story, edit that, and then afterward, say I do that a week in advance or so, then I go back and I'll record the episode and then edit that in. So that's what I do. I figure that's easier instead of doing it all at once when it's discussing a show, for instance, especially, and then when I have a short story to share with that. So I hope you found that all interesting. And again, I thank you so much for joining me on this podcasting journey. I'm excited to, again, expand the reach of this podcast. It's on several platforms: Libsyn, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Podcasts.com, Player FM, and now more recently Spotify and TuneIn. And of course on the website, StorytellingSaga.com. So again, thank you so much, and looking forward to the future of Storytelling Saga. And with that is going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. You can follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Storytelling Saga, as well as on Twitter at Storytell Saga. You can also send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by leaving me a message in the contact section of StorytellingSaga.com or by sending me an email at StorytellingSaga@gmail.com. Next week, computer, laugh with me. I don't want to. I will be discussing Invader Zim, Enter the Florpus. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.